Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this DR2 breakfast meeting. Let's wait 1 minute for everyone to arrive and settle in. Grab a coffee, water, whatever you prefer, or something to eat. It's a breakfast meeting. We'll wait a few seconds before we start. I can see people are still logging in, which is great. I'm just waiting a few seconds more to start. Just feel free to settle in. All right, we're almost at 30 people. I think we can already get started. So again, welcome everyone for attending our second breakfast meeting on the Data Act. I'm Cathy. I'm a senior consultant at Dr2 Consultants. We are a public affairs agency in Brussels, doing public affairs for EU, but also Benelux public affairs. And we are specialized in digital tech, in sustainability, energy, transport, mobility sectors. So it's a pleasure to welcome you to our second edition. The first one a few weeks ago we held about the Data Act and its impact on the sustainability sector. And now we are focusing today on the transport and mobility sector. We at DR2 we follow closely the Data Act itself, but also the data economy issues and developments in general. So we welcome everyone to who is interested in the topic and wants to stay up to date to sign up to our newsletter. Who is a monthly newsletter that we do for DR2 at DR2. So let me just check how many people we have so far. We have, oh, that's great. Okay, it's still going up. So as a reminder, on the 23rd of February, the European Commission published the Data Act, and it was the regulation, of course, called the Data Act, which is a part of the EU data strategy that was published 2 years ago by the Commission. The Data Act focuses on B2B, B2C, and B2G data sharing of non-personal data in order to grow the economy by sorry, I'm just deleting here the pop-up. To grow the economy by actually 270 billion of additional GDP by 2028. In the meantime, the political parties in the European Parliament have started to get organized around this, and the Council also has said that it's a very important file for them. So we expect that the Data Act will not be finalized by the end of this year, and even will be finalized not much sooner than the current political term, so spring 2024. So the Data Act is a horizontal framework, of course, and it will be accompanied by some sector-specific legislation to complement this, such as, for example, the automotive sector, which will be discussed today. For that, the European Commission has launched a public consultation on this upcoming initiative regarding the access to vehicle data, functions and resources. And the deadline, by the way, is until the 21st of June. This specific initiative sets the conditions for accessing and using in-vehicle data, enable clear and competition-friendly rules for services that are based on access to car data, prevent risks for cybersecurity, road safety, IP, and data protection. So this all sounds very promising, but let's hear what our speakers have to say about all this work from the Commission. So now it's with great pleasure that I would like to welcome our guests for today, Mr. Mikael Isaksson, Public Affairs Officer at Volvo Cars, and Dr. Nima Barraci, Senior Manager, Group Data Strategy and Transformation at Lufthansa Group. So, Mikael, Nima, thank you very much for being here today. We look forward to hearing your views about the Data Act and the impact on your respective companies and sectors. So, following your opening statements, I will ask you a few questions before opening up the floor to the questions of the audience. And for that, I encourage everyone to post their questions into the chat box, and we will read them later on. Mikael, you're the first on my screen, so you can start with your opening statement, and feel free to introduce yourself briefly as well, of course.
Sure, thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation to participate. Nima is still frozen on my screen, but I'll do my intro and then I'll see if I can connect back in. But anyway, should be fine. Quick word about Volvo Cars. I mean, I think you all know us. You know, we're the Swedish premium automotive manufacturer you all know and love. You know, we're heavily focused on sustainability at the moment. We aim to be a fully electric car company by 2030. But increasingly, we're also a tech company. We know we focus a lot on in-house software development, improving the connected experience for our customers, developing, you know, autonomous driving, etc. So data plays an increasingly important role in our business, but also in our products. But above all, we are and remain a consumer and driver-centric brand. So, you know, we focus on, you know, the personal freedom to move in a personal, sustainable, and safe way, and safety and by extension privacy in the case of data and cybersecurity really is at the core of what we do. So, you know, having a consumer-focused approach from the Commission when it comes to the Data Act, we believe is the right approach, and we really want to see more. You know, we really encourage that angle to take center stage, and everything the Commission does when it comes to, you know, in-vehicle data for us should be primordially be relevant for the data and the drivers. I should say on the data business and the connected cars, we do have a system today that allows us to share data with third parties. It's called the extended vehicle system. I won't go into the details, and you know, so we can save some time for the conversation. But it is essentially a system that allows us to store data on a secure and remote server from which the third parties can access the same data as we have access to in the car. It just, you know, prevents, you know, unauthorized access to the car system directly for obvious, we believe, safety and security reasons. You know, but that being said, you know, the connected car business is still a very new business. You know, it's not mature yet. We have some very promising business cases, but we are still trying to find our way, both in terms of products, services, but also how the technicalities go about this and how the business models can be sustainable and benefit all players in this ecosystem. So in that sense, I believe it's important that the Data Act doesn't sort of hamper innovation in what I believe is a very promising sector for the European economy. I'm not only talking about the OEMs, but also, as I said, all the players in this ecosystem. A lot of European companies stand to benefit a lot from the connected car business in the future. So in that sense, the Data Act should rather lay down some basic principles to ensure that data can be accessed on a level playing field and on sort of commercially fair basis, but that above all protects, you know, the consumer and the driver. And in that sense, we'll get into more details as we discuss, I suppose. But the Commission's proposals must be workable for us. And at the moment, the way it's written down in the Data Act, we really struggle to see how a lot of these requirements will be feasible on a purely physical and technical level. I mean, we talk about direct access add-on and limited basis. Just the amount of data our cars produce today every minute is quite staggering, and a lot of that data is simply to ensure the functioning of the car, of the basic, you know, functions of moving the car forward, especially for electric cars. And most of that data is completely irrelevant, not only for the consumers, but also from a business case point of view. This data is simply there to make sure that the car functions as it should. Now, maybe a quick word then on the smart and sustainable aspect of data. I think in our industry, and especially for us, as I said, the focus at the moment and for the next coming years, I think it will be to reduce tailpipe emissions through electrification. And I think if I just may, quick shout out here to say that it's so important that the Commission's proposal to end internal combustion engine cars by 2035 is adopted, because I think they will really push the industry into a new era that we really need for obvious environmental reasons. But that being said, data, of course, and connectivity do play a role in managing traffic flows, especially in urban cities, to make, save energy. Again, in a post combustion engine world, we still need to be mindful of energy efficiency, of course, because the electricity we use to charge the cars will have to come from somewhere. So we need to be mindful of that. So connectivity and data certainly can provide new solutions to optimize traffic in that sense. That brings me on to another point. At the moment, we have other EU legislations are being discussed that are very data heavy, even if they're not necessarily data focused. I'm thinking about the ITS directive revision, which is ongoing, but also things like the battery regulation or the alternative fuel infrastructure regulation, which is primordial to ensure that we have the charging network we need to support the electric transition. And those pieces of legislations, they contain elements on data sharing, which is fine, because the electric car is quite a technology evolved equipment, so data is inherent part of the product, so that's fine. But we just need to be mindful not to create situations where one piece of legislation undermines the other and vice versa. But anyways, very excited to discuss this today, and I think we have some great potential for a European data economy when it comes to mobility. We just need to ensure that it's done in a way that benefits everyone, especially the consumer.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mikael. It's very interesting to hear you talk about this topic. And before we get into it more, I'm giving the floor to you, Nima, to say a few words. And again, don't forget to introduce yourself briefly as well.
Thank you very much, Cathy, for having me here today. Maybe a few words about myself. I'm Nima. I'm now with Lufthansa Group for a couple of years, more than 20 years now in aviation. By heart, I'm a computer scientist, so I know a little bit to talk about data and what data means, what data can also mean in the sense of improving automation, improving efficiency, and also improving ecological efficiency. A few words about us, Lufthansa Group. We are best known for, of course, our airline, Lufthansa, but we are not only comprised of the airline Lufthansa, we also have Eurowings, Swiss, Austrian. So we have a number of carriers combined under the roof of the Lufthansa Group, and also maintenance, repair, and overall provider Lufthansa Technik, and other business. So we really cover a lot of aspects in the aviation domain. When it comes to data in the aviation domain, one needs to imagine and to make clear how much data is being produced every day when we operate our aircraft. So an A350 alone produces per day about 2.5 terabytes of data. This is roughly a Netflix movie every day. The 787 is in no way different from the A350. So we are really talking about data-heavy assets. And these data-heavy assets, they are, to a large extent, completely unregulated. So there are no rules to whom the data belongs. There are no rules who needs to have access to that data. There is, of course, some standardized data. So when you look at the standard avionics bus and so on, there are standards out there, but the sensor data, the data that is stored in the built-in test equipment of the avionics, the data that is collected during flight by the engine, this is something, there is no regulation that really mandates that the data is readable and the data is accessible by the operator. So this is why we as Lufthansa Group, we, in principle, have a very positive stance about the Data Act. We see it as, Mikael, as a possibility to level the playing field, since we produce data as Lufthansa Group with our assets, but we do not have access to that data, and we would like to actually see what kind of data our assets really produce every day. On the one hand, we want to do this because it helps us to foster competition, and also to help us to get access to better and more innovative products. Products around data are like, for example, services around predictive maintenance, services around predicting of failures of components, and so on. And yeah, there's a lot of innovative potential in there, and there's also a lot of potential to increase the eco-efficiency of the aircraft and of the entire aviation system. We learned over the years that when you repair a component before it completely breaks, or before it breaks to the extent of 95%, you actually save a lot of effort, you save a lot of material, you increase the longevity of the component, and by that, of course, you improve the ecological footprint. A component that can be repaired before it breaks doesn't need to be reproduced and then reinstalled. Yeah, so all the effort that you put into that machinery pays off over a longer duration of time. And so this is also why we see that the EU Data Act has the potential to help us to reach the sustainability goals of the European Commission, and also to help us to lower the ecological footprint of aviation. Yeah, that being said, I'm really excited to the ongoing and the coming discussion, and yeah, would be happy to also learn more about your position, Mikael, and yeah, also from the audience.
Thanks very much, Nima. Thanks both. I think it's a great basis for a discussion. Maybe my first question would be quite general and basic, because this is all very technical, and maybe it's not entirely clear for everyone how that applies to you. So do you have a concrete scenario in which the Data Act would apply to your company specifically?
Should I go, or Mikael? Yeah, okay. So yeah, with pleasure. So let's take the example of the A350 without going into the OEM discussion, that it's an Airbus. As I said, with the 787, it's exactly the same. So those 2.5 terabytes of data that every aircraft produces every day, in that data stream, which we only partially can assess what is really stored in this data stream, there are a lot of information that are useful during the optimization of our ops. So when we know that a component is going to fail, an aircraft component with a high probability, we can take measurements, we can take steps to prevent that. We prevent that so that operations are not being disturbed, so that the actual price of the repair is less, so that the ground time of the aircraft is minimized. Similar it is with aircraft health monitoring within AHM. You have the ability, if you let your aircraft being monitored by a third party, which is usually the OEM, the maintenance intervals can be adapted to the actual state of the aircraft. So if you do not sign up for the AHM, as a matter of fact, you have to go into scheduled maintenance every so and so many hours, every so and so many flight legs. But if you sign up for AHM, again, this period can be stressed, can be extended, depending on how you use the aircraft. And then, of course, the ground time for the aircraft, if an aircraft is not in maintenance, is reduced, and you can actually bring the aircraft to action and let it do what it can do best, flying. So this is why the access to the data, and also the ability to look into the data, is of high importance from the one hand on the business perspective, but also from a legal perspective, because we as Lufthansa Group, we are responsible for the data that our pilots create during every day. So this data is also in part GDPR relevant. So we also need to protect them by knowing what data is being shared with third parties. So this is why, in brief, really the Data Act is very, very is very, very relevant to us. We, as I said, do also have the hope that it will help us to actually get more insight into the data that is being shared with third parties without our.
I can just add on that, and I mean, much in the same way as Nima said, we have also maybe not on the same scale. I don't know how many Netflix movies we produce per hour and the equivalent in our cars. But of course, a lot of applications for data. I'm thinking sort of predictive maintenance services, insurance, rental fleets, purely sort of convenience aspects for the driver. And of course, as we also move into a more sort of mobility as a service sort of provider scheme, we also have sort of cars on demand, etc. It becomes more and more important to sort of harness that data, and of course, completely understand there's a need to create healthy competition in Europe as well. So again, it's not that we don't want to or do not share our data. We do today already, but it's all about who has sort of the burden to sort of process and store and do all that sort of processing before the data becomes usable for the wider market. And I think there, with the Data Act needs to take that better into consideration, that ultimately we as the OEM are the one that must sort of are collecting and sort of storing that data today. So I think it's important to find and strike the right balance. So as I said in my intro statement, that we do create sort of a viable data economy for the mobility services in Europe.
Thanks very much. Well, this leads me to the question that we, one of the main reasons for the Data Act to come to life was to the problem of limited ability to combine the data emanating from different sectors and different actors in one value chain. And now users will be able to demand that the data be made available directly to third parties. Do you see for your respective companies and sectors that this, might entail possible competition risk? In the first webinar, we heard quite some concern about insufficient protection for trade secrets. Is that a concern that you share? And if so, what kind of guarantees would you need to avoid this?
I mean, I think we should definitely use stronger guarantees when it comes to trade secrets. Just on that point specifically, a lot of data our cars generate also does not sort of belong to us in that sense. When it comes to trade secrets, we use a lot of components by third parties, and that's sort of their IP. It's their trade secret. So I think the Data Act could certainly do with some more stronger sort of wording around protecting data and trade secrets related. And again, but when it comes to competition, it's not that much that we're afraid of competition, but we don't want, again, I come back to this point, it has to serve a purpose here. A lot of data that's produced by cars is simply not usable for the consumer or or third parties to develop a business case on. So we don't want to overburden, especially not the consumer, with having sort of, pick and choose what data he or she wants to be made available to any third parties, and under what conditions in that case. How do we sort of make that? I'm really struggling to see how that would work in real life, quite simply. Of course, again, competition is healthy, competition is good. We believe in that, and we already have some, competitive offerings on a number of data connected car related services. But it has to be workable in practice, and that's where I fail to see how this could work. I mean, simply imagine yourself, how would that sort of work? Would you get sort of a pop-up in your infotainment system, asking to share data? Just on a very practical level, I sort of struggle how that would work for our industry in this case.
So so we look at it really from a B2B perspective. So and I also agree. I don't think that any passenger on board one of our aircraft would be interested or would even understand what kind of data the aircraft produces while the passenger sits in the cabin and enjoys the drink flying from A to B. But really, are we looking at it from a B2B perspective? We think that this is more of an opportunity, the Data Act, to foster innovative new products and new services than a risk. And in the B2B sector, there are a lot of, in our sector, in the aviation sector, there are already a lot of startups, a lot of small enterprises, which try to combine the aeronautics know-how that individuals have with data that comes from aircraft, and they try to offer prediction services for single components. So not looking at the entire aircraft, but just looking at a high pressure valve or looking at some sort of actuator. And so I can predict the condition of the aircraft. I can monitor it. I can even go into an insurance product by correlating the usage of the component on board of the aircraft combined with the route and the weather conditions that the aircraft has been flying through. And this is what I believe is for us key in the Data Act, that we would be able to share that data that our assets produce with third parties, have them also access data like meteorological information, like, for example, also airport information, and try to combine that data to generate more information, to generate more knowledge so that we can take better actions. So really from our perspective, it's really more an opportunity than a risk, but I understand, of course, in the B2C environment, you may have different considerations and also different limiting factors. Yeah, I wouldn't like to have my infotainment system inform me about sharing data with third parties as well.
Yeah, well, this makes me think that, a lot of companies will make a lot of extra efforts and investments to comply with the Data Act. And, you need to be able to, in order to comply, you need to invest in, the right in data infrastructure and quality and security. Mikael, you mentioned that Volvo already has a lot of setup for this. But for example, for Lufthansa Group, does that mean that you will have to invest a lot into making sure that the infrastructure is, and how do you ensure that the quality you share is high? Is that even important to have high quality data or not?
So let me tackle the question from the high quality point. So of course it's mandatory. It's a mandatory prerequisite to have high quality data, and to have the data also to adhere, when we say high quality data, to adhere to quality requirements. But now coming back to the Data Act, we don't see that there are any additional burdens put in the Data Act regarding our additional statements regarding quality, other than data has to adhere to the fair Q principle or to the fair data principle. Our expectation is, when we get the data from the aircraft, that we get the data in the same quality as the data is being produced. So actually, we do not need to have anyone improve the quality of the data from the aircraft. We just want to have access to the logs, to the sensor logs, to that information, so that we can interpret it, and if necessary, also improve the quality of the data. So we are really the data consumer in that context. And for that consuming of the data, also storing and processing of the data, the infrastructure, we already have that. So no company nowadays can run efficiently and also in a secure way without having a top-notch IT security infrastructure in place. So we also do not see any additional requirements or additional investments necessary coming from the Data Act for us.
Well, then a question maybe to you, Mikael. I mean, Volvo Cars is also a bigger player in the market, but do you think that for the smaller ones in the sector, do you think that the Data Act offers enough incentives to invest and data processing, or do you think that this might hamper innovation, as so people don't get caught up in the law?
That's an interesting question. I think it does take some sort of scale to sort of process and manage and sort of build a commercial offering out of the connected car data. I mean, we're not it could put the big guys as an advantage in that sense. The big insurers, the rental fleets, or the etc. But I don't see any intrinsically limitation for SMEs to join the market as well. But I think you're absolutely right to focus on this notion of high quality data. That's what we need to build services. That's what we need to improve safety. That's what we need to improve the offerings for the consumer. So I think that's what we want to do. We don't necessarily want to build sort of a again, we don't want to create sort of a GDPR on steroids here. I think we need to focus on what's actually relevant, both from a business point of view and a consumer point of view. And I think that will also make it perhaps easier to create a level playing field with smaller competitors or service providers who are not bogged down in this sort of massive datascape we would create.
Do you foresee that we can expect that new, in general, that new business models will arise from this?
Yeah.
Or how will
that's Volvo a good question. I mean, you can all speculate on the future of transportation, and I think there's a lot of very interesting things happening in the car space at the moment. From car sharing, of course, ride sharing. I think we can start to wonder the place of the personal car in the future. I mentioned in the beginning we want to offer a more connected and customized experience to our customers. Almost like we don't like the the analogy between a smartphone and a car, because there's so many different aspects there when it comes to the product itself. But in a sense, the car will become sort of a more personal extension of yourself and your life and your connected devices at home and whatever. So who am I to? I'm not an expert on the future offerings here, but I'm sure there are many business cases that can arise with or without the Data Act, I might add, if I'm completely honest. Because we see a lot of things happening, outside in the in North America, in Asia as well, on the connected car front. So that's also, I think, an important argument here that again, European companies and companies operating in Europe shouldn't be bogged down by excessive legislation when it comes to data, because ultimately it is a global market. So it'd be a shame to see Europe falling behind in an industry where it still has very much some very strong assets and strengths.
Yeah, it's usually first innovation and then regulation. So let's see if the Data Act.
But that's the thing, yeah. And here we're sort of like begs the question if regulation is not sort of moving too fast than innovation sometimes. But I'll leave that open for discussion.
Yeah. Maybe a question to both of you. We saw in the some concerns in the previous webinar, and just in general, if you're into this topic about the Data Act, you see some concerns about people saying, okay, this isn't about non-personal data, but this could lead to drawing conclusions about personal data, and it might be blurry in the end. Is that a concern that you guys have as well? And what about security? Having this Data Act. Does that mean that you have to share more, and that this could lead to weaknesses in the systems? And does that hamper the cybersecurity issues, or you don't see this in that way? I can't hear you, Nima. Am I the only one?
Not right now, I can't.
No, okay. I'm not the only one.
Should I take that one while Nima tries to...
yes, that'd be great, thanks.
Fix his audio troubles? No, on cybersecurity, obviously that is paramount for us, both from a product point of view, but also from a consumer standpoint. We will never let any sort of legislation or any sort of requirements hamper the safety of our products and our consumer. That is and that's everything we focus on. Katie, your question was, is that if that could have a negative impact? I hope it won't have to come to that point where we would have to make a choice between abiding by a potential Data Act and cyber security. But we will never, I think, compromise on cybersecurity in that case, or safety.
Nima, let's Yes.
Okay, I think now you can hear me very well. So first of all, we share the concern regarding or the requirement for clear delineation between the Data Act and GDPR data. So we really need to have that worked out, because if it's not worked out, we are going to face issues. But we also have to bear in mind that in our business, we nowadays already share data from the aircraft with the OEM. And in order to share that data, we have processes in place which ensure that personal data or data that could be attributed to a person is only shared for a specific case, for a very specific use case, and then also deleted afterwards. So the processes are already in place, and I see no issue in applying the processes that we have also to the data sharing or the data created by the aircraft, and then by us to be passed onward to a third party. But it's important for us that we want to know what data our aircraft actually produces, so that we can also make the knowledgeable decision, okay, we share this data with an OEM, it has no personal data attached to it, or no data that can be attributed to a pilot, to a crew, and by this actually ensure that we are also from a legal perspective on the safe side, so that we do not compromise on the personal rights of our staff.
Okay, thank you very much. I see that we have a question from Lotte Dekink in the chat from RDW, and it's a question for Mikael. She asks, the Data Act also covers to a certain extent business to government data sharing. Would Volvo Cars be open to sharing technical use data directly and freely available with public authorities performing statutory tasks?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Lotte. We already do share data with public authorities and traffic authorities, notably in the framework of the Data for Road Safety program, but also other things to, again, in our Swedish obsession to improve safety. So that is something we are definitely open to do, even for statutory tasks. I presume maybe you're referring to like CO2 monitoring and stuff like that. On the principle, absolutely, yes. Again, it has to be done in a way that sort of we believe maintains the integrity of the vehicle. So we wouldn't be so keen to have sort of a direct access from authorities to the car system itself. But again, through a neutral server system, yes. So short answer, yeah.
There is another question as well from Gareth Shear from Oxera. Gareth asks if, he says, I am interested in the application of FRA&D, friend, fair, reasonable and non-discriminatory terms for data sharing obligations within the Data Act. Given what you have both said about the volume and technical nature of your assets data, could you foresee a case where you might want to share data with different recipients on different terms? I don't know who wants to go first.
Nima, do you have a happy to have you?
So I'm looking at it really now from a consumer or from a business consumer perspective. We would like, of course, we would like to have access to the data on the same terms like everyone else who has access to or who has access to the data to data. When I think of data coming from our Boeing fleet, that should the terms shouldn't be any different for us than any other Boeing operator. Data that comes from Airbus fleet shouldn't be any different. The terms from any other Airbus operator. So really leveling the playing field. This is what I would say here. Us as a data provider to third parties. As I initially said, so we really, as Lufthansa Group, look at it more from we are the operator and owner of the assets, and we want to have access to the data rather than we provide passengers or anyone else with access to our data, because this is something that also is not part of the Data Act as we see it, that we need to share data with our passengers on the actual sensor data, for example, of an actuator with a passenger who is flying on board of the aircraft.
Mikael, yeah, if you have anything to add, feel free.
Maybe just add, I think it's always complicated to start having different terms, commercial terms for different businesses, I suppose. I think that's the whole point of having non-discriminatory and FRAND, the FRAND abbreviation, right? So I'm not an expert on sort of commercial sort of law or relationships, but yeah, I think in an ideal world we would sort of like to have a level playing field here, sort of have equal terms for all players, with maybe a carve out, of course, for governments and public sort of interest purposes.
Well,
if that was the question.
We have another question from Oxera, and this time from Tristan. And I won't even try and pronounce your last name. I'm afraid to butcher it. But it's a question from for Mikael, and it's: are there specific carve-outs of data that should be out of the scope of the Data Act in order to protect OEMs' incentives to innovate, and to the safety and security of your drivers?
So I think that ties in a lot to the notion of we need to introduce the notion of what is meant by accessible data here. Really, we need some clearer specifications and language around the obligations that are expected on our part and that are relevant to third parties, and also sort of make sure that includes, as I said, a system that by which it would be completely acceptable to have data stored on a secure third party or secure neutral server. And then as well, we have to on the incentives to innovate. I think it's important as well that we have carve-outs in terms of well, not carve-outs, but strong language on safeguarding competition, and that that this notion that the data shouldn't be used to develop competing services, etc. I think that's positive language, but mostly I think the innovation concerns would mostly be on, again, that technical point of view, that we need to understand that whatever data, whatever technology we develop, because that would inevitably generate data, shouldn't be hampered by fear of having to make that data available in sort of real time and instantaneously onto to whoever. So I think that's really the technical, again, aspect that is important here. I hope that's clear. So we're not that worried about the commercial aspect here. We're mostly worried about the technical aspects here on the Data Act.
Thanks very much. I don't see any new questions, and it's a time to come to the conclusion. So may I conclude with one last question to you both? If you had one message to EU policymakers, what would be your elevator pitch? I invite Nima to go first.
Yeah, thank you. So what would be my elevator pitch? So I would actually ask the Commission to really make the Data Act an enabler for innovation in the space of data-driven applications and services. So we see a lot of services, data-driven applications emerge, and we really make the Data Act an enabler for that, to support competition, also to support competition by addressing the issue of coupling services with hardware, and put the control of the data back into the hands of the owner and the operator of the machinery which creates the data.
And I would argue that we have a terrific potential now for the future of the connected cars and mobility related services more broadly in Europe. And unlike perhaps other tech sectors, we actually have from the beginning very, very strong European players, both on the OEM side, but also on the third party side. And I think it's very important now for the Commission to sort of encourage the development of those services, which will generate, I believe, incredible amounts of wealth and sort of help European economy grow. So it's important in that sense to have a balanced approach to the Data Act that ensures that while we fully support the ambition to put the consumer at the center and sort of empower the consumer with his and her data, we shouldn't mix up. We shouldn't do data sharing for the sake of data sharing has limited interest for everyone. It has to be relevant. There is potential, as I said, but it has to be done in a way that is technically feasible, because that'd be my very short point here. At the moment, the Data Act is simply not technically applicable to us. I'm talking to my colleagues back in Sweden. They're like, this is not going to work. So make it realistic, make it in a way that encourages innovation, and that will benefit everyone in the connected mobility ecosystem.
Amazing. I think that's two very clear and concise elevator pitches. That makes sense. Well, the next webinar, the last one, will take place on the 16th of June. Will be with representatives from the European Parliament and the Council. So we will make sure to take on these messages and hint them at them. So this leads me to conclude, and thank you both very much, Nima and Mikael, for your contributions, for your insightful thoughts and questions and statements. I think it was a great discussion, and I would also like to thank everyone who attended, of course, all the participants, and thank you to those who have asked questions in the chat. So there you go. We can conclude here, and I wish everyone a great day, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much. Speak soon.
Cheers. Bye.
See you soon. Bye.